Welcome back to the Cohen Curricula. Today we're just going to have a quick talk about context and how important it is to study context in the text that you are looking at. It doesn't matter which of the texts you're studying, the significance of context to actually giving you the layers of meaning that's going to take you up into those higher bands. Use that whole model of the iceberg. You know, there's 2/3 below, there's a third above. If you understand the context of your text, you are enriching what's in that third above. So I like to study 7 contexts, and I've actually taken the social, the cultural, the historical from the syllabus, but I've expanded those a little. So I'm just explaining those for you. There is a workshop in your pack and it explains each one in detail and gives you some suggestions of where you would be looking for those things in your text. So let's start with social context. Social context will be evident in your text through work, through education, through leisure and relationships. So the relationships you have at work are going to be quite different to the relationships you have in your school environment. They're going to be quite different to those you would have in your sport environment or your leisure environments. And then you have relationships at home with your family. You have them outside of home with your friends, with your workmates, with your schoolmates. So any aspects of your text that are looking at those relationships that take place and how they differ and they change will actually add meaning and layers to your text. We actually put on different faces when we're actually in different environments. So we want to have a look at how those social contexts work in your text and how they interact. One of my favourites to look for in text, because every text is embedded in it, is cultural context. Cultural contexts are those traditions, those rituals that we actually see in texts that are innate. If we've got a text that's talking about Christmas, we're either imagining the Aussie barbecue with all of the prawns on it, or we could be looking at that traditional English barbecue, not barbecue, it's a Christmas dinner. So if we're looking at those traditions and those rituals, they actually are part of our cultural heritage and part of who we are. Often in text you'll see them through the clothing that people wear, you'll see it through the foods they eat, or you may even see it through those economic processes that are in the text that they actually limit people in their cultural worlds because of their access to actually earning an income. So these will all interact. As you can see, the cultural would have something to do with social and so on. Political's really important. Every single text that you study is going to have power roles in that text. So they could be about government. It could be about governments imposing rules. So I'm looking at shoehorn sonata at the moment. So we've got the Japanese government, we've got the Australian government. Whatever you've got in terms of governance and that being imposed on people and the rules and the laws could be mentioned in your text. But we can also have relational power. One character is more powerful than another character. And they actually may use that power, they might manipulate people through that power. So have a look at where there is political context going on in your text and see what that tells you about the way that the relationships are structured and how they work, or how one person is enfranchised and another person might be disenfranchised. Historical's really easy to find usually. It's those specific historical references, things like dates, places, that actually do put the text in a very specific historical context. Sometimes they're quite explicit. You might find a text that's still talking about making videos or putting it into the video or the VHS player, or it might be telling you now that it's a Blu-ray. We're going to be able to tell the difference between the context or the time when the text is being produced. Then we can look at when it's implicit, so when it's just suggested through the text and it just infers particular meanings that are historical and that we can actually find information from, and that could be just down to something like an inherited trait. Gender's really important because when we're looking at gender, we're not looking at boys and girls or sex, we're looking at masculine and feminine and notions of masculine and feminine. So we don't want to worry about being whether they're male or female. We want to look at the expectations and the traits. So we might have a female who is really quite aggressive, so she's showing masculine traits and she's defying a sense of the feminine. Or you might have a character who actually embeds themselves in the feminine and likes those expectations, or perhaps rails against those expectations. So talk about that gender context and how the text has been deliberately constructed around that. Religious context does actually seem to be in most of the texts that we're looking at, because it's not just about God or a religion, Catholic, Christian or otherwise. It can be any spiritual context that is actually implied in your text. So those sense of the metaphysical that we experience, something between soul and mind and body, nature and the universe. Look at connotations that might be in your text. Many of the texts that we study have those Judeo-Christian values in them. So that's looking at a religious context in the text. Maybe the text you're studying, so if you're doing Life of Pi for the area of study, you would be looking at some alternate religions. You would be looking at the range of religions that are in there and the expectations and associations and what people can draw from that and what people can benefit from that. Finally, intellectual. This is probably the most difficult of them because it's actually about theory. And I like my students to look at theory. One of the simple ones, for example, would be binary theory. There is always a good and an evil character in a text, or there's good and evil, right and wrong. Or you might be looking at more sophisticated theories like new historicism, feminist theory, Marxist theory, and so on. You don't want to be bound in theory, but you do need to acknowledge whether a writer is actually working within a particular theory for when they're doing their writing. So these are my 7 contexts: social, cultural, political, historical, gender, religious and intellectual. Thank you.